So every expert-led firm has a structural problem that predates the operational problems they have. Something that we well know and a lot of us have observed. And I'm experiencing myself and fixing for myself as well. Is that the founder or the expert is playing about 7 roles in one person. And none really has a real system because all 7 really lives in the person's head. They're literally like 7 employees in one person. You look at any firm, you'll see where there's an expert led, where the founder is still the expert, and it's maybe a small to medium sized firm. That founder expert is the CEO, there's the CFO, the CMO, the head of sales, the head of ops, and senior expert. And in engineering firms, they're CEO, their business development lead, their senior estimator, the engineer of record, the risk manager, the quality director, and the ops manager. And this is why every decision still routes through them, and the business really can't grow without them being in everything in the room, in every decision. And scaling feels like they have to put more time in instead of working from a place of leverage. So I see this as not just a productivity problem, I see this as a judgment extraction problem. The first time I observed this was when I was at Intel as a process engineer from semiconductor manufacturer in a high stakes process. There were tool issues and a lot of things that had to wait for me. And it created a whole life situation where I was skipping meals, I was going home late. A lot of times my relationship was strained and I was gaining weight. And it was at one point when I had a conversation with my manager that helped to unlock a whole lot for me because we had documentation. But then when I realized that my judgment wasn't in those documents, that's what freed me. And the principle I'm going to share with you is I see it in so many different places that we overlook. Just recently, my wife and I we bought a potty training book, and we that had the experts thinking in that book. It was called Potty Training in 3 days, and we were literally able to essentially train our son in 3 days. And then the other place I see this is in the Bible. You see expert judgment there in the Bible, in the books of Proverbs and Ecclesiastics and the different aspect throughout, where you see expert logic, decision logic, structured in a way that other people can live from to get the outcomes that expert already got. So this is a system that I observed. I didn't create it, but I've structured it in a format so it could be applied in businesses. So I'm going to share with you the framework. I call this framework EMS, which really just stands for Expert Multiplier System. That's the Expert Multiplier System. It has 3 phases. 3 phases. We have the map phase, map. Then we have activate phase, and we have the multiply phase, basically. The multiply phase. So 3 phases: map, activate, multiply. It has 6 steps. Actually, before I tell you the 6 steps, in each phase, the map phase, this is where you will find where the expert judgment is most concentrated, the map phase. And then the activate phase, you'll extract the judgment and build it into a judgment operating system your team can run. And then the multiply phase, this is where you'll deploy the system after you've built that judgment extract operating system amplified by AI. You'll deploy the system, and that will enable the expert, the founder expert, to be able to move from just being the builder to the architect. And you expand this one stage at a time. So this is a living, growing system because it models after an expert, a person, which we live and we learn and grow. So now we have six steps. Let's see if I can write them. So step one is you find find the best work. Find the best work. That is step one. And then step two, you'll map the chain. We'll get into what these are when we get more to the framework. And then step three is you find drum. So in all these three steps, they're part of phase one. So these three steps are part of phase one. And now we have the activate phase. We're at the activate phase right here. Activate phase, this is where, so step four, you'll extract the judgment. And then step five, you'll build the judgment or decision operating system. So those steps 4 and 5 are part of the activate. Steps 4 and 5. Steps 4 and 5 are part of the activate phase. And then you have the last phase, which is the multiply phase. And the last step, rather, step 6, right? Step 6, which this step 6 is you deploy plus multiply. And then we'll get into all this. So yeah, 3 phases: map, activate, multiply, MAM. And then you have 6 steps, right? And here's a key part too, that AI will handle the building and the writing of a large chunk of this. But the key part is you, the expert, bring the thinking. Very important. So step 1, finding the best work. So I use the principle in process engineering, the Pareto, or the 80-20, people refer to as the 80-20. We'll use this to actually find your best work. You find the 20% of projects that gives 80% of the outcomes that you desire. Maybe those outcomes could be based on revenue or margin, or your desire and direction and goals. And so you create a short list from that. And then step 2, you map your business. You'll map your business according to a specific framework I call the expert value chain. This is 5 steps in this, 5 R's. The expert value chain is just really how judgment is applied to a client's problem to transform it to a delivered solution. So the first R is you recognize. This is where, you use judgment to ask the question, or use judgment to surface, is this the right problem? Is this the right client? And then you have the second R, which is reveal. This is where you use judgment to say, what's the actual problem beneath the one that the client presents? And then the third R is you resolve. You design some sort of design or pricing or setup of what your resolution is going to be. This is where some engineering firms would normally write a proposal. And then the fourth R is you build and execute. And expert judgment will be used here as well, obviously, and also in the review, the quality checks. So that's the fourth R, realize. And then the fifth R is release. After you've transformed that client's problem to a solution, the next step is to release it to them. All right, now we move on to step 3, which is finding the drum. The drum is, and this comes from constraint thinking, the drum is usually the thing that sets the pace in your workflow. In this particular case, we look at it as, hey, where does work pile up waiting on the expert decision? Everything upstream could be ready, but downstream is waiting. And there's 3 tests that you can use to find the drum here. You can use the buffer test. Like you look at it from this perspective. Where does work sit waiting for the expert's decision? Where is the visible queue? And the second test you can look at is a dependency test. If you were available for a full week, which stage would crash or stop first? And then the third test in step 3 is you can look at is the throughput test. If, say, your team ran on that stage from the 5R independently, what would raise throughput or outputs in the business the most? That's some ways how you can find the drum. That wraps up for phase 1. Now we move on to phase 2, which is activate. And now we're going to look at steps 4 and 5. Steps 4 and 5 are part of the activate phase. Now, in step 4, a key thing you're going to do is what I call a mirror session. We're going to work towards doing a mirror session. This is where you would place the expert in a real or recent project. The expert would have a facilitator. This could be like your junior that people normally do training in the business anyway. But the thing is, a lot of times people do training, it's just a matter of transferring words from one set to another, maybe showing some stuff. But I've been in many different training events, and usually you don't end up remembering a lot of the things that you were trained on. On this, you still have to go to the expert and be like, hey, or they come to you and be like, hey, how do you do so and so again? So the key for this is, so we will set up a real session, I call it the mirror session, where it's like the expert could pretend, or not, well, not pretend, actually set a frame of mind like they're training the junior. The junior is going there to really extract the judgment from the expert, understand. They go prepared with the founder or the senior lead, the facilitator, which could be the junior, not the expert. And then one real project, clearly remembered, and a recording tool like Zoom or some voice transcription. And that you could do for like 60 to 90 minutes. And in the next step, I'll show you a structure of how we would like capture that expert judgment. But before that mirror session too, you need to do some pre-work, like map out 6 to 10 decisions inside that drum stage that you found in step 3. And that will determine what the expert actually, well, you map out the decision stages and moments where the expert's judgment determine what happens next. So these would be your extraction targets. Like example decision points, say in a structural engineering firm where they might be looking at the reveal stage in the expert value chain, they could be looking at things like what signal tells you a crack is structural versus cosmetic. When do they set up a discovery phase in their proposal before committing to the scope, or when do they actually say this problem is outside the scope of their lane, right? So this is pre-work, but you're working towards that mirror session in step 4. Now, in the same activate phase, remember I said that we'll do the mirror session and you'll have the expert, the facilitator, a recording tool, and preparation, a real project, and a list of questions. But there's a key engine here, the extraction engine. I call this the QY decision action. CYDA. Actually, I could write it here. Yeah, I call it the CYDA. This is the core extraction engine, which will the facilitator, or not facilitator, actually AI tool to help you structure the judgment in that, like what cues, what do you see or notice first? Like what matters and what connects what they see to a decision. So that's the why. That's the why. The why connects the cue to the decision. So and then decision now, like the D, what fires in your mind when you see these cues and it connects to some principle, and then the action. What action do you usually take? So this forms that extraction engine. So now we're in step 5 of phase 2. Now that you have those judgment extracted and structured according to the Q, the Y, the decision, the action, the CYDA framework, you can then build the judgment extraction system. This is where AI is going to help a lot. You can use several prompts and different things to actually help to structure that in this format. And then the expert will review this, right? And we find the gaps, and then we go back to the library, we rerun until the judgment is captured as accurately as possible. So AI will do a lot of the heavy lifting here. Once you capture that call and you transcribe it, you can structure it with prompts. AI can go through and pick out the different things. It's a marvelous system at this point where AI has unlocked this. Because before this was done in a manual way, but now with AI, it just scales easily. So the key thing about this judgment extraction system, though, is that it's not just like reading, creating documents and reading steps. It's actually a system that can produce actual outputs like the expert can. Like outputs such as like proposals and risk assessments and invoices. That's the beautiful thing about this. Not even just that alone, but it produces those outputs like the expert, but also will help juniors to be able to understand the expert thinking. So it's a system that juniors can be trained upon. It's like you literally have your living system that can train your junior and also produce outputs like the expert can. This is like a real unlock. So from this system, you can structure your things in like 4 different categories. You can have your decision run book, or you'll have some escalation framework as well, and boundary condition guide, and a whole AI agent infrastructure. So now we're in phase 3, which is the multiply. And this is the last step, which is step 6. Step 6 is deploy and multiply. Once you build that judgment extraction system that can produce outputs like the expert can train your juniors, you want to install that in the right place. Ideally, right, obviously, where the drum is, the thing that sets the pace for the business, right? So you set that there. And then now this will facilitate a new division of work where your team and then you, the expert or the founder, and your team runs the drum stage independently using the system. And then you, the expert, the founder, can review and approve. You're not building from scratch. You're now the architect and the reviewer, if you want, based on you can set up your review systems. And as the system becomes more accurate and captures judgment and produces, because we'll have feedback loop to, well, you make sure you have feedback loop to ensure that the system is outputting correctly according to your standards, and that can be continuously improved. And so the next step, within the division of work, now AI can help the team to actually generate those first drafts, similarly to how an expert would, right? Because the expert judgment is the engine of all of this. It's not just AI using average judgment and knowledge that it's trained on in the global internet, but now we'll be able to have your unique expertise and judgment in the system to ensure that your quality work can be delivered at the scale of which AI is now creating massive output for companies. So, but protecting your quality and standard while getting other benefits for your team. So, as the founder expert can handle 20% that genuinely that needs you, right? And with the team now can probably only really escalate through boundary conditions or edge cases, and the expert, the founder, can design the expansion of the system to other areas. Once you're like 70% of decisions are run independently, and as that can be improved over time, return to the drum stage and find which now is the new constraint and apply the same architecture and then remove that one bottleneck at a time. And so you create a continuous improving loop, but not just randomly improving things, but the things that really move and set the pace in your business. It's really about ensuring that the expert judgment is available at each stage without the founder having to be involved in every single stage. This is what I call multiplication without the grind. I hope this helps.